Hi, welcome to Clotheshorse, the podcast that will never force you to buy 10,000 straw fedoras. Today we have all-star Clotheshorse guest Janine back to talk about excess inventory. Trust me, it's an exciting story filled with hubris, despair, and straw hats that are really made of paper, with a bad zipper thrown in as a twist. Do you remember learning about basic needs in elementary school? You know, food, water, air, shelter, clothing. So yeah, clothing is a basic human need, but somehow, somewhere it got way out of control. Globally, we waste one garbage truck of clothing every second. 6 out of every 10 garments are burned or buried, meaning going in the landfill, within their first year of production. Wait a minute, did you hear that last part? Within their first year of production, i.e. in the same year that these clothes were made, they go to the landfill or are burned. According to the EPA, in the US alone, we send nearly 13 million tons of textile waste to landfills annually. That's an entire football field filled 14 feet deep with clothing. That's a metaphor for you sports fans. Textiles, aka fabric, release 500 million tons of microfibers into the ocean every year, the equivalent of 50 billion plastic bottles. The U.S. has the highest contamination rate, with 94% of tap water containing plastic fibers. Remember in episode 1, we talked about how we each consume one credit card-sized serving of plastic each year? That's how it happens, and our clothing is a big culprit. So today, while we talk about how retailers and brands end up with excess inventory and create an epic amount of waste, I want you to think more about your personal excess inventory. Data indicates that although women are spending 5% less than they used to on clothes, they are buying 20% more of them. Cheap clothes, man. You know what cheap clothes often mean? Synthetics. And what are synthetics? Plastic. And where does plastic go? Into our water supply. And then what? Somehow we eat it. It's a bad story, guys. One email survey of American women found that those who responded owned an average of $550 of unworn clothes. Just chilling out at their house. I know you're thinking about the stuff hidden in the back of your closet or under your bed or stuffed in a drawer that still has the tags on. That's what we're talking about here. However, if you wore your clothes 9 months longer, remember, a lot of these clothes are going to the landfill in less than a year. So imagine wearing these clothes for 9 months longer. I mean, that's not even that long. If you did that, you could reduce the carbon and waste footprint of your wardrobe by 20 to 30%. Wow. Really makes you think about #oops, I wore it again, wearing things over and over again, giving them new life by styling them differently, wearing them with different accessories or shoes or layering pieces. So what's the overall takeaway here? Well, it's buy less, wear it longer, extend its life by passing it on to someone else when you're done with it. Maybe buy it used in the first place. I mean, okay, maybe if we all at one time sold our $550 of unworn clothes on resale apps like Depop and Poshmark, we could save even more waste. I would love to hear what you're doing to consume less clothes. I bet you've got some really good ideas that you could share with the rest of us. Send me a message at clothehorsepodcast@gmail.com. Okay, enough nagging. Let's get into the episode. Hi, Clotheshorse listeners. I have a huge treat for you today. Janine is back.
Hello.
Janine's basically famous. She's an all-star guest already, having appeared in both episodes 1 and 2. And so I don't know, Janine, is there anything that has changed since the last time we talked or any other fun facts you want to call out about yourself?
Unfortunately, no. Everything is pretty much the same.
Okay, but you do have a kitten, which you have not mentioned in previous episodes, and
yes.
Instagram content is solid gold.
Yeah, the kitten is great. Her name is Nightmare. last week. I'm trying to think if it was before or after we recorded, but I took her to the vet for her first vet visit. And actually, before we took her to the vet, I thought that she was a he. And then we found out that she is a she. But really funny because I feel like she's actually quite gender neutral, as kind of most cats are. So
yeah.
ascribing her a gender seems kind of silly. She's actually locked out of the room right now so that she can't interfere.
That's a good call.
A handful. So she lives up to the name. She really does.
Well, and it's a good gender neutral name anyway, so it all worked out,
Exactly.
All right. Well, so today we're going to talk about something that might sound boring on the surface, but it's a nightmare of its own, but not in a cute little kitten way. I just thought that one up on the fly there. I've been actually thinking, I came downstairs yesterday after recording an episode, and my husband and my daughter were watching reruns of Sally Jesse Raphael on some app. And it made me realize that I really think that my calling is to be a 90s talk show host. So if anybody knows of any opportunities for that, please reach out to me ASAP.
You could definitely get a perm.
I would definitely have to get a perm. I'd probably wear a pantsuit, which I've never done before. But I think, maybe one of the surprises of this nightmare that is 2020 is we're all going to do really crazy different things in 2021 and be glad about it. So
I would be very glad to see you wearing any blazer with shoulder pads in it. The bigger, the better.
Yeah, big. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about excess inventory. So I thought I would give you some, I know by now that I love a fun fact, and these are actually really unfun facts. So not so fun facts. First off, 10 to 15% of the 150 billion garments made every year go straight to landfills without ever being owned by someone. It's like pre-consumer. If you didn't get your calculator out fast enough, that's okay, because I've already calculated that. It's 15 billion garments. That's so many zeros. They're just going to the landfill. No one's ever buying them. They're never touching a body, maybe in a fitting room, but that's about it. So this number, as horrible as it is independent of the clothing thrown away by consumers every year that they've already bought. And if I haven't mentioned this already somewhere along the line, the average consumer throws away 70 pounds of clothing every year. First, I was like, I love a formula, trying to figure some stuff out. And I was like, oh, maybe I could figure out the average weight of some clothes and then how many garments that would be. But you know what? I think 70 pounds is good enough for all of us to picture 70 pounds of clothing. And so in the United States alone, we send 21 billion pounds of textiles into landfills every single year. And since most of these clothes contain synthetics, aka plastic, they aren't biodegradable and they will sit there forever. You add these to these garments that are being thrown away before anyone even buys them. It's like, are landfills just clothing now? And maybe I don't know, water bottles and diapers. What's in there, Yeah,
it's wild.
So you might remember a whole bunch of news going around in 2017 about H&M, and maybe you haven't. Maybe this was just something that people who work in the industry knew about. But Danish TV, a television station, revealed that H&M, one of our well-known fast fashion retailers, had burned 60 tons of new and unsold clothes since 2013. So this was in 2017, right? So in that time period, those 4 years, they'd burned 60 tons of clothes. And I couldn't really name a number of garments that would be, but I do know that this included 30,000 cowboy-themed trousers for children, which sound pretty cute, actually.
I agree.
Right. And then less cute, really more appropriate for a 90s talk show host, were some dark blue ladies' pants. And they still had the price tags on them. They'd never been bought. Nothing had ever happened, but they'd clearly been intended to be purchased. And those 30,000 pairs of pants, they were just a small part of the incinerated inventory. So this was some really bad press. Strangely, H&M didn't come out and say, okay, we're going to stop doing that. And so by 2018, they had continued to accumulate even more of this like unsold inventory. And at that point, the value of all of this excess inventory was $4.3 billion. And like, I don't know if you've gone to H&M recently, but everything's like $20. So we're talking a lot of garments here. So we're going to talk today about how something like this could happen. But in terms of H&M, they kind of checked all the boxes of like a perfect storm of how you end up with lots of inventory. So it was like slowing sales, they bought into the wrong trends, quality fit issues, and just buying too much inventory in general. And in fact, their excess inventory problems are so ongoing and so just epic in scale that a power plant in Vesteras, which I might be mispronouncing, this is the town where H&M founded its first store and was where they have a lot of offices. That power plant relies partly on burning defective products that H&M cannot sell in order to create energy.
Oh my God.
I know. So gross. So gross. So today we're going to talk about how retailers, because H&M's not the only character in this drama of wasted clothing in the world. We're going to talk about how this happens to retailers. How do they get there? Is there a part that we as the customers play? Is it all in the businesses? Janine's a great person to unpack this with, because if you don't recall, one of the jobs of a planner is to manage the inventory.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting topic because as a consumer, of course, you see things when they're on sale. And maybe when you're in the sales section, you might see a bunch of children's cowboy print pants and realize, oh, that thing obviously didn't work out, or they obviously bought too much of that. But I think a lot of the excess inventory and wasted inventory and just inventory that becomes literally trash is really invisible to the consumer. And if you're in the business, it's something that you're painfully aware of all the time. The entire job function that I worked in for, many years, the main job of that function is to prevent excess inventory and to move through inventory to make sure that we don't end up with excess. But if you're just like the average person shopping in a store, retailers really do their best to hide the ugliness of this part of the business from customers. And so, yes, you might see things that are on sale for super cheap, but other than that, there's like a whole world of liquidation and destruction that goes on to get rid of this excess inventory, which is really crazy.
So there are two ways that this happen. One is based more on specific styles, and of course, this can be death by 1,000 paper cuts as well. And then there's another route to excess inventory that is really based on larger business decisions and business trends. So we're going to start with the specific style related ways you can get a lot of extra inventory. And the number one way that this can happen is basically the buyer picked the wrong thing, right? The demand for a style did not align with what they bought. Maybe it wasn't it sold okay, but maybe it wasn't great, but they bought it to be great. And I could get really down in the weeds with this, because when you're buying, you're planning things to be an A buy, a B buy, a D buy, going to some stores, going to all stores, and they're tiered out and it's very specific. But once again, while you might be using previous data to make these decisions, it's really also about intuition. There's there's a mixture of science and art in buying. And sometimes with the art, you just miss the boat. So sometimes it might just be one style, or it could be an entire trend. Like this really sticks with me, Janine, but you mentioned in episode 1 or 2 that there was a situation in which 5,000 berets were purchased. And I think about, I have a beret in my closet and I saw it the other day and it was like triggering.
In that particular situation, which we won't name names, but one can infer. But anyways, this is a perfect example of the brand was launching a new marketing campaign, and we were launching a catalog in timing with that campaign. We had a very exciting cover girl on the cover of the catalog, and she was wearing a beret. And so this image of her in the beret was like the hero image of all of our marketing for that season, with this like celebrity and all of this stuff. So there was a big push to make sure for those specific items that this woman was wearing on the cover that we had as many possible units of all of these styles as possible. And one might infer that a beret is a bit specific.
Why?
In fact, when the beret trend was like really going strong, I tried really hard to wear a beret, and I've tried it so many times. It's also like it's low risk. Their berets are like $15-$20. Like, it's not expensive. And I really tried. I tried multiple berets in multiple colors, and it just never worked on me. And so, surprisingly or not surprisingly, every customer was not purchasing herself a red beret to be just like,
oh, wait, it was a red beret?
It was red.
Man.
It was red. I mean, to be fair, the girl on the cover, she looked great. And she looked super cute. She looked amazing. Cute little red beret and a little trench coat. She looked great. There was never anything that ever told anyone that 5,000 units was an appropriate number of red berets to buy. And I'm pretty sure that was also just in red.
Oh my God. Stop.
Not like, because I think we definitely also had it like in obviously black, maybe yellow, like a gold yellow, and maybe one or two other colors. And I think 5,000 in the red alone were purchased. Which is just like,
that's I
too
mean,
many berets.
You know what? It's too many berets. You know, it's strange, but I also have my own hat nightmare story from my buying career. Mine was a little different and even more just offensive. It was straw fedoras.
Oh my God, I have my own straw fedora catastrophe.
Stop.
Well.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you my story, but I bet it parallels yours so similarly.
I'd also like to know what year it was.
I mean, this was pretty early in my buying career. And at that point, I was managing a lot of different accessories classes. And one of them was hats. And, you know, there's certain parts of hats that are an eternal business, right? Like people need to wear beanies and whatnot in cold weather. And, you know, there's a little bit of a demand for like a floppy sun hat in the summer, but it's not huge. Everything else about hats is kind of trend based. And so either it's way in or it's way out. Like hats might go out of style because everyone's wearing headbands, or even suddenly it's scarves. Like it's, you know, it's all over the place. So there was a year that we tested a straw fedora, and this was when like fedoras were really starting to come into their own. And
I know this deeply.
Yeah, I mean, what year do you think that was? Was that 2010? Was it before?
Yeah,
then?
I was gonna say maybe 2011. Actually,
okay.
I think 2010, 2011 might have been when they were really having their moment.
Yeah.
And I would say, I don't know, maybe it was, yeah, it might have been over by 2011. I don't know. I'm gonna dig into this when we're done recording, because I need to know. Don't you need to know? So anyway, so there was a fedora moment, and if you were alive then and cognizant of the world, you were witnessing this going on around you. And so we were kind of, when I say we, I mean, I don't know why I'm speaking in the royal we. I mean, I was pretty skeptical of fedoras initially because it was very niche in the beginning, but like all trends, it spread like wildfire. Yes. And specifically, it began to pick up momentum in the spring of that season. So we tested this straw fedora. I don't know, maybe I bought like 500 units, and it sold out like immediately. And so then it was like, okay, I'm going to buy 2,000 units. Okay, now those sold out, I'm going to buy 5,000. And so it was this picking up momentum. And of course, fall came, and I wasn't going to continue to buy straw fedoras. And so they switched into like wool and felt, and you know what, the business was really strong. But by the end of that like fall winter season, as we came into spring, I felt really strongly that, okay, yes, we had sold a gazillion fedoras the year before, but I could see that it was waning. And I mean, there were already like memes about how lame fedoras were, right? It was like, it was going to die really hard and really fast. And it did. So I one of the meetings that is sort of a part of most calendars for a buying team is like a sort of like a buy review, where you show what you're going to buy for the next season for a specific delivery period, and you show it to like
other buyers, leadership in the buying team, head of merchandising, maybe the store merchandisers are there, et cetera. And so I'm lining up my hats, so I'm on the table, and there was a straw fedora in the end, which I had not wanted to write at all, but I wrote like 200 units because there were still some stores where it was kind of performing. And I thought, like, let's fill them in there. And it was like more like, I mean, I hate to say this, but it was like the middle of the country kind of stores where they were a little later to the trend. So it would still be new and exciting to them. And at that point, our head of merchandising, the GMM, I'm going to tell you, he was a monstrous bully. Like, he went on to be a CEO at J. Crew, and that's all I'm going to say about it. He's not there anymore. But he was a yeller. He would yell at you. He would like humiliate you in meetings. And he just lit into me that fedoras weren't going to be a big deal. And I was just like, no, like this trend is dying. Like, I try to explain a meme to someone at that level. You can't, right? But then my boss, who was the head of accessories, was like, you know what? He says, you gotta buy it. I want you to write 10,000 units. 10,000 units.
Oh my God.
So I had to go back. Not only did I have to place this 10,000 units, but we were already sort of cutting it close on delivery that I had to air some of them in. It was really stressful. And I felt really frustrated about it because in order to make room to afford those hats, I had to cut out stuff that I felt was going to be a lot more viable because, I have a budget. And those hats did not sell at all. I mean, at all. And they didn't sell on Markdown. They didn't sell on further Markdown. And they all got chopped out. And who knows where they went after that. And it messed up all of my margin targets and sales targets for that category. And I did not get my bonus, which was devastating. And the thing is, like, I hold myself responsible for that because I could have left that meeting. I could have talked to my boss who said, you have to buy this. And I could have gone back to my desk and built a case for why I thought that trend was dying. Like, I could have, I could have made a chart that showed the sales declining. There are a lot of things I could have done. And so for me, that's always been one of my biggest lessons in buying is to don't just be mad and be like, fine, and stomp away and do it. Like, come back to the table with a case.
That's so funny because I feel like my story is so similar to that in that, like, yeah, I started working at Banana Republic in 2010. So it maybe the summer of 2010 was when they were hitting, or it could have been the summer of 2011. But whichever it was, we had bought some straw hats. And with Banana, the lead times are like 9 months. So there's like if something sells out, it sells out. That's it. All you can do is like try to like redo it the next year. So whatever straw hats we had bought, the year that, they had been so popular, we sold out of. And fun fact, to go back to our previous episode, straw hats actually often aren't made out of straw. They're made out of paper.
Yes. They absolutely, the straw fedoras that I'm speaking of were 100% made of paper.
Yeah. Ours were also 100% paper. And therefore they're really cheap. And so they're a very attractive item to buy because they have a really high markup and the cost is really low. So we had sold out of these straw hats. Maybe we had one style in 2 colors or something like that. The next year we had maybe 2 styles in 5 colorways total. And girl, we were buying these straw hats. I mean, I think we easily had probably 10,000 units over the 5 styles, probably closer to like 15 or 20,000 units.
Oh my God.
And so we had straw hats like nobody had straw hats. And to your point, that trend like came and went so fast. And so by the time that we had made this big investment into the straw hats and they had launched into stores, the moment had really passed. Mm-hmm. And so then my job was to like manage out the inventory of these straw hats. And I mean, and so this was Banana Republic physical stores. So one of the like fun problems with having physical stores is that the inventory has to physically go someplace in the store. So if you have 100 straw hats on Markdown or just 100 straw hats anywhere, they have to physically sit on a table or in a shelf or in a cubby or somewhere. They have to like be available for sale in the store. And I I kept marking down those hats because we had to make room. They had to sell out. So that, like, when you have physical stores, you have to sell things out so that when the new stuff comes in, there's physically a place for it to sit and be for sale. Online, you can just bloat in a warehouse, but in stores, you have to actually move things, turn things more quickly because you will physically run out of space in the store. And so I'm marking these hats down, marking them down. Like, I mean, I think at some point they were maybe like $2.97 or $1.97. I mean, like,
Yeah.
really cheap. And they were just like the bane of my existence, trying to get rid of these stupid hats. But at some point, like when you're on, I worked in an office and looking at the computer, at some point, like the computer, like more or less tells you like, okay, like materially the hats are gone. But I remember being in a store, going into a Banana Republic store with my sister, like in the winter time or maybe the following spring.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh my God, they're still here. And I told her the story of the straw hats, and she was just like, couldn't believe it. And I was just like, fuck these stupid hats. Like, I've been trying to sell these hats for so long. And especially and we'll talk about this like in the episode, but for a store like Banana Republic or something like that, when you have too much inventory of something, once it's in the store, it's there. Like, there's no moving it. You're not going to pack it up and ship it out to a reseller or an off-price something, or even to donate it or anything. Like, once it's in the store, it's too labor intensive and therefore too costly to move it out of the store to get it someplace else, because it's just, you have a million stores everywhere and they'd have to like find the stuff and pack it and send it. I mean, it just wouldn't ever happen. So the primary means of getting rid of like too much inventory in a store is just to liquidate it to the like lowest price possible. So if you ever see something in a store, especially, a retailer like Gap or something like that, and it's so cheap, you just have to appreciate the reason it is so cheap is because of how bad the miss was.
Yeah, and that somewhere there are buyers and planners who are losing sleep over this item and possibly
Crying.
10 years later still shaken up by it.
Oh my God. Yeah. My sister actually, after the first episode came out, she said, you didn't tell the story of the straw hats.
Here you go.
I was like, we'll get there.
So we're saying, okay, an entire trend, an item can be a miss or like one style. And also there's like, and we kind of touched on this with hats, but some categories are sort of like cyclical in nature. And one that I think of a lot is jumpsuits, which is very trend specific, but is often in many retailers its own category. So you might have a season where jumpsuits kind of come out of the blue and you're building that business, but one day it might fall off the cliff because suddenly everybody wants to wear dresses. Or, we've seen a lot over the years, a lot of fluctuations between denim and athleisure. Like, people want to be comfy, people want to wear jeans, people want to be comfy, people want to wear jeans. And sometimes that's predictable using data, but a lot of times it's not. Obviously, like, there's no retailer in this world that knew coronavirus is coming and knew that everyone would wear loungewear for 6 months. Like, it's some of it's out of your control, like, despite your best efforts.
Scarves had a huge trend in probably like 2014 or 2015, something like that.
I managed scarves then. That's another one that died.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it was just a moment, and it's fine.
Do you know that retailer COS? They're owned by H&M.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, H&M is there. They own And Other Stories as well.
Yeah, I knew that.
So COS, if you're not familiar with it, is like minimalist fashion. Around 2013, 2014, maybe a few years later, the long-held sort of kitschy, cute, quirky kind of Zooey Deschanel trend died pretty hard all at once. I mean, it had been holding on for a long time, and it was replaced with this minimalism trend that was a lot more about solids. It was modest, sort of loose, tunicky, drapey stuff. Very different from the conversational print, fit and flare, cute glasses, bright color trend that had lived for quite a while, almost since the turn of the century. That was when cause began to come up. And I actually read an article,
So funny.
I don't know, last week, a couple days ago, that talked about how cause is really struggling right now because that trend is over. It is true. Like the last time I went in their store, I was like, oh, everything feels so stale. Like I don't want to wear a solid, like modest smock anymore. Like that's over.
Right,
Like now I want to be more boho, or I don't know. Actually, I feel like that vintage vibe is starting to come back again. But it is all over the place. And if your brand identity is so deeply connected to one of those aesthetics, I mean, as an overall brand, that can be a loss.
Or on the flip side, you could have been, I think of like Everlane, where like they always had this, sort of, minimal aesthetic. And then when that became really on trend, everybody started doing it too. Right. And so then maybe you kind of own this niche. And then once that niche exploded, everybody's doing it too. And so now they can buy the things that they would have bought from you anywhere. Because Uniqlo is doing it, and Gap is doing it, and Target is doing it, and all of these other brands are copying and are playing into the same trend. And it used to be something you did that was uniquely you, and now you're competing with mass market. Everybody's doing the same thing, and so you have to fight a little bit more for your market share.
100%. So that kind of covers the idea of like a style or a category or a trend being sort of a mistake to buy. And once again, not necessarily because the buyers or the planners were idiots, just that evidence made it seem
so unpredictable.
Yeah, it's so unpredictable. It seemed trends, like both business trends and like social trends, seemed like it was still going to be there, but it just wasn't. So that's one way something might be stuck around and selling for 50 cents. There could also, and this happens a lot more often than you might think, there could be a quality or fit issue. So in an ideal world, this would be caught before the item was available for customers to buy. And it often is, because when you buy something as a buyer, you get a sample in advance. You might even get multiple samples in advance, like depending on how long the development process is. But the final sample you get is called a TOP. It stands for top of production. And it is theoretically, and I say this theoretically, is supposed to come from the actual production run where the whole order was manufactured. That is not always the case. And that is often when the buyer gets burned. So if you get a TOP and you get someone to try it on and it's too small, or you can't put your foot through the legs, or it's falling apart, or it's the wrong color, or I've referenced before a cape that was glued together, like you're going to catch it then, right? And so the customer's never going to see this product, and it's never going to go to the warehouse. But that doesn't always happen. So you might get a sample that is not actually a TOP, and probably for some sort of sneaky reason, to be honest. And so at that point, it's gonna go to the warehouse. Now, hopefully, somehow it was caught then, maybe because you pulled a sample to shoot for the website. And in that case, you could work with the vendor to negotiate an RTV, which is a return. It means return to vendor. And so at that point, you'd say, hey, here's the total units you sent us, send us the shipping labels, or we'll charge you back for shipping. And it would just get mailed right back to the seller. But if it maybe already came into the warehouse and went out to the stores, and so now the customers are experiencing whatever's wrong with it, then it's as Janine said, like once it's in the stores, it's a lot more complicated. So sometimes the vendor might be like, you know what, just, damage it out, meaning throw it in the garbage,
right?
And we'll give you a credit towards your next order. Or maybe, and if this is like a much more egregious situation, or maybe the vendor thinks they can resell it to someone else, you're going to have all the stores pack it up and ship it back to your warehouse or directly to the vendor. So I've had all those experiences. So, like, what's the most egregious fit or quality issue you've ever had in something you bought personally or encountered at work, Janine?
I was actually thinking about this for a long time last night, and I didn't have anything that was like jumping to my mind, but a good example of the TOP versus reality was I had bought a skirt from ModCloth, which was my employer, and it had like accordion fold pleats in it. And it was also metallic, like this kind of interesting metallic fabric.
Sounds cute.
And so the fabric was kind of delicate, and then it had these pleats in it, and then it had a side zipper. And I couldn't figure out, well, actually, let me just say it had a zipper, and I couldn't figure out where the zipper was supposed to go because the zipper was so like rounded, like it was like popping out. And I think it was because the way that they had sewn it into this pleated fabric, and the way that the fabric was kind of had like, it wouldn't lay flat naturally. It had this it was kind of thick, I guess. I'm not articulating this well, but anyways, the zipper was like so poofy and like rounded out. I couldn't decide if it was supposed to like go like that on my hip, or if it was supposed to go like that on my butt, like to round around something. And I'm not an incredibly curvy person, but I'm also not curvy. And so I was kind of like, I don't know, is this just not shaped right for my body? And then I was just like, no, they just put this zipper in really shitty. And so I brought it to work because I wanted to show our head of production. I was like, is this how it's supposed to be? Because this is crazy. And he looked at it and he was like, can you put it on? And I was like, yeah. And I mean, as soon as I put it on, it was like comical. Like, I mean, this zipper was like bulging out of my side. And he was like, that's really crazy, because he was like, here's the TOP. And he gave me the TOP, and the TOP was lovely. They had put the zipper in the bottom part of the pleat so that like it just wasn't doing this bulging thing. And he was like, here, you can just keep the TOP. Like I feel bad you spent money on this, and like, you know, it's obviously so wonky. And so then after that, he took that sample, or like the one that I had bought that was messed up, and he took that back, and then he went back after them to be like, this is bullshit. You gave me a fake sample. And so I don't know how that ended, but it was just pretty, like, in the same way they probably pulled a fast one on him, thinking like, oh, we'll send him this like very well done. And it was probably just a not like a mistake, but it was probably just like, that zipper probably needed to be put in exactly the right part of the pleat. And the way they cut the fabric, you could cut it where the zipper would land on like the pleat coming out instead of the pleat going in. And so you would just have to be really mindful with the way that they did that. But if you're mass producing, you know, if you're making 1 or 5 or 10, you can be really mindful of the way that you put the zipper in. But if you're making 1,000, you're just going to blow through them. And so, so that was my like crazy kind of fit, kind of quality.
So often in these situations, it's the customer who sort of rings the alarm that something's wrong. One thing I've countered time and time again in my career is items that are faux leather, aka plastic, coming in, vegan leather, if you will, coming in. And this is like, it's always the same thing that people say, that it smells like fish. Have you heard? Oh God. Yeah. So you worked in accessories, so you know how this can happen. So customers might be returning stuff and saying it smells like fish. You might hear that from the store team. People might be leaving reviews. That would be an example of something. So what we would generally do in a situation in which there's inventory to audit, we would have the warehouse go and smell all the bags and see if they smell like fish. We might send a note out to the stores like, hey, can you pull aside all of the bags that smell like fish? And then we might, once we get a count, we can kind of address what the problem is. And it's sort of a similar situation if something comes in and like there's an egregious quality issue in terms of fit or like sewing or whatever, we'd want to have a store team kind of give us a count, because sometimes it's not everything. Like with Janine's skirt, it may have just been all of the ones that were in her size because of the way they cut the fabric, or it could have just been a couple. And you have to kind of investigate before you can make a decision. And so when you encounter things like this, as a buyer, it's so stressful because it ends up being a long process with a lot of nagging and touch points and emails and negotiations. So as I mentioned, sometimes you can RTV this, or the vendor will just be like, throw it out and we'll give you a credit. Another thing that you can do sometimes, which I have done a few times in my career, is negotiate markdown money. And basically that's that vendor saying, I'm going to reimburse you for the money you're going to lose by having to sell this on sale. So we're going to make up what you would have made at full price. And this is pretty rare in specialty stores, but it's a very common part of the department store model. And in those cases, the buyers would also negotiate a markdown money plan for things that just didn't sell, not because of quality issues, but just because they weren't popular. So the way they manage their money is a lot different. Janine, have you ever negotiated markdown money from a vendor or been around when it happened?
Not really. Primarily because as a planner, that's not really my job.
Fair enough.
In full transparency. But also it just wasn't something that certainly in ModCloth that we did for a variety of reasons, but it always kind of felt like a little bit of a fool's errand. We were such a small business, like small potatoes compared to the vendors that we were working with. And we were doing such small units. It was just like, we were happy that these vendors would even work with us. So it was just like trying to, like, we didn't have any power in the situation. And kind of similarly, like the money that we would be fighting for would just be like, I don't know, like $5,000 maybe or something. And it just kind of was like, didn't feel like it was worth the work of, doing the whole back and forth, potentially putting like putting the relationship on ice, and all of that. And at Banana, that was all of our own production. So there was
no markdown money to get. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no one to blame but ourselves, so we were accountable for all of that inventory. So I would say in my experience, not super common, but to your point, like I never worked for a department store. And I know from just my colleagues, like one of my old managers, she came from Nordstrom and she was shocked when she came to ModCloth and that we didn't negotiate for markdown money. Cause she was like, I was a pro at that. She was like, that was like one of the best that was like one of the parts of my job I was like the best at. And so she was sort of disappointed that like she couldn't, that we didn't do that.
So I actually did, I've only gotten markdown money like 2 or 3 times in my career. And one time, the first time, was at ModCloth. And it was a lace dress program that was really important to our business. I cannot remember the name of it, but if you shopped on ModCloth in that era, you know this dress.
It's When the Night Comes.
When the Night Comes, yes, thank you. So it was huge for us. And it was exclusive to us. And we spent a lot of money on that program. And one of the colorways came in with just like a massive sizing problem. Like it was as if it had been sewn to a different pattern. It didn't make any sense. And of course, we didn't know this until customers started returning it, complaining. And at ModCloth, more than anywhere else I've worked, we had such a strong relationship with our customers and we really listened to them. For me, it almost felt like devastating that I had like fucked up somehow. The good news is that the vendor that made it was actually a pretty big, and still is around, a big department store brand. And so I didn't even have to push for it. They were like, how about we give you markdown money? And so we worked it out. But it was the first time that had happened at ModCloth. So AP, that's accounts payable, reached out to me and were like, so what are we supposed to do with this? I was like, I don't know. I don't work in accounting. And the person I spoke with was like, well, we've never gotten markdown money from a vendor. So I don't know what happened. They deposited the check, I'm assuming.
Yeah, just cash the check. I mean,
I know. I was like, I'm not an accountant. I don't know how it works. Don't ask me. And another time at another small startup that I worked for, a startup that was much smaller than ModCloth, one colorway of a really significant program came in, just a disaster. It was some white pants. They were part of a suit, and the fabric was completely see-through, for one. The sewing was so bad that there were these like rat's nests of threads inside the garment that you could see through the pants. The needles were just jamming up or something. And this was every single pair of pants because, of course, I had all the teams pull all the inventory and I inspected it myself. The other thing that was really problematic is that most customers couldn't fit their feet into the leg of the pants. So it was bad. And if you could get your leg into the pant, get your foot through, you couldn't bend your leg. without the pants popping open.
Oh, God.
And I mean, it was like everything that could go wrong with a pair of pants. And so in that situation, I also negotiated markdown money because we'd already paid for the product. And I was like, if we're going to sell this at all, we're going to have to sell it at like a sample sale.
Sure.
I mean, basically they gave us a full refund when you get down to it, because we sold everything for like $5 with the idea that maybe people could turn it into shorts or something. I mean, it was just so bad. But it's pretty uncommon practice in specialty retail, but it's a huge part of doing business in department stores. So that's another way that you can end up with extra stuff. Basically, it's just not good. But there are ways you can work that out with the vendor to at least recover the money. Now, once again, the product still exists. So on the business side, like the financial part of it, everything's good. We can move on. But I mean, there's still a physical garment that has to go somewhere. So we're still looking at like a lot of waste, even if it's not the waste of money.
Yeah, because it's already been produced. And like it's
Yes. What are you going to do with it? You're going to cut it up. You're going to burn it. You know, maybe donate it. We'll talk about all these things later, but it's just not that simple. So then another way you can end up with a lot of extra inventory is returns. And a lot of times these returns will be associated with fit quality. Like if they're really egregious, it's because the fit was weird, they were falling apart, they smelled like fish, something like that. Like it was already dodgy. In brick and mortar stores, so meaning like when you go to an actual store and get to try something on and buy it, the average return rate is around 10%. And you expect that because people have the opportunity to see something in real life, to see if they like the fabric, to make sure it doesn't smell bad, to try it on, you know, to look at themselves in the mirror. You operate under this assumption that most things aren't going to come back because people already know what it is. However, I also started my career working in a store, and my mind would be blown by the returns that would come in. Like people would come in on Saturday, spend $300 on stuff, return it all on Monday because they were regretful. For online fashion, you're probably not surprised to hear this, but the return rate is a lot higher because, you know, you're buying kind of blind. As Janine mentioned in a previous episode, like she wants to touch things, right? I all the time order things, get them, and I'm just so scandalized by how gross the fabric feels or it's snaggy. Or
I'm also just a shameless over purchaser when I shop online. Because for a variety of reasons. First of all, if I see something that I really like, I would like to buy it in 3 sizes because I don't know what my size is going to be. Mm-hmm. And even if it's like someplace I've shopped before, every time they make a new thing, it's still a new thing. And so I just don't know what size I'm going to be. And if it's something I really like, I know that if I get it and it's the wrong size, I'm going to be very disappointed. So I will often order things in 2 or 3 sizes. Because I'm a terrible person and I just want it. I want what I want when I want it. Or I also will shamelessly buy more things to hit the free shipping threshold and then return the thing.
Oh, 100%. Everyone does that.
Yeah. And I'm like, I have no, like, oh, I need to buy something. So I hit the $50 free shipping thresh. And I'm fully going to return this item that I bought, like, because I don't care. I mean, and also I sometimes will buy things where I'm like, okay, I'm looking for like a dress for a occasion. And so I will buy maybe 4 or 5 dresses in 3 sizes.
Oh my God.
With the intention of only keeping one, right? And so I would always joke, like at ModCloth and any retailer, they track the return rate. So the percentage of returns that come back either for a category level for the whole company, and then for specific customers. And I would always joke that like, I'm sure my return rate was probably like 85%.
Oh, mine too. I mean, I'm that person. Like much as you were saying, I'll order 10 things and I will tell myself when I'm placing the order, you can keep 2 of these. You know, like
yeah. Well, then, or if I order like something I'm really excited about and I order it in 3 sizes and then I get it and the quality is like not what I want it to be, then I'm just going to return all 3 because even if it fits, I don't like the quality or I don't like how it feels or whatever, or it just like doesn't fit my body because my body is not the shape of the thing that this was like made for. And so then I'll just return all 3. And of course I feel like some guilt about that, but it's also like, I don't know what people are supposed to do.
When you order online, your house is your dressing room. So it makes sense to me.
Exactly.
I mean, I can't even remember the last time I went into a store and tried clothes on. So I have to really go deep into the recesses of my brain to remember going to stores and taking 10 things into the fitting rooms. Like the fitting room attendant being like, well, the maximum's 5, so I'll hold these out here, right? So I would swap back and forth these 10 items and I would leave with 1. And so that is what online shopping is for a lot of us. The return rate for online shopping, it ranges from 25 to 50%. And I think it could be even higher than that. But maybe there are other people who aren't like us who keep things. I don't know.
My sister is actually the opposite. Well, one of my sisters, she is, I don't mean this in a negative way, but she's lazy when it comes. She'll buy things and it won't fit her. She doesn't like it or whatever. And she just like, it just sits in a corner in her house and she just never returns it.
Oh, guys, don't do that. It's bad. It's bad too.
I'm also like, that's free money. If you don't like it, just return it. Like, get your $50 back. And then she's just like, but like, post office and box and label and tape, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it's definitely worth the money. I was like, I'll return your stuff and give me a commission.
I also have people in my life who are like that. We need to form a support group for people who are close to people who won't return things.
I was like, this is the entire like business model for Stitch Fix is built on people like you. Built on people not returning things because they're too lazy.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm like, we should do an episode about these like subscription services and the statistics behind them, because I have so many feelings about that.
I have a lot of feelings too.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. But anyway, I have a lot of thoughts there. So one reason that retailers give a deadline on returns, which I'm sure you've seen, it'll be like, oh, you have 30 days to return it to get your full payment method back, or after that you might only get a store credit, or some retailers you're not going to get anything. It's because they don't want this product coming back after the ideal sales window is over. Like if you return a pair of shorts in October, they're not usable now until next year. So they're going to have to go to a serious markdown to be sold. And going back to our very stressful conversation about straw hats, you don't want someone to buy a straw fedora in March or April and return it in high winter because it's lost all value. So that's another way that very slightly retailers can manage their returns a little bit to prevent stuff from coming back too late. But once again, like if something is a flop, it's always a flop in all kinds of different facets. And no matter what, you'll just have a lot of inventory of that style sitting on the store. So that's the way like one style or trend, something very specific can go awry. And once again, like if you made a huge bet on a lot of different things and they were all wrong at the same time, I mean, you're going to get into a much bigger problem. It's like you're going to have straw hats coming out your ears, and maybe you also bought cargo shorts or something. And those, I don't know when that was a trend, but that was people who wear fedoras like cargo shorts. So it would seem that maybe they were together. Anyway, you can get into a really bad situation. So next we're going to talk about the high level way, meaning larger stories that cause a ton of excess inventory all at once. And this is kind of like the kind of stuff we're seeing at H&M. Like this is going to be the source of most of their woes. Why don't you start, Janine? Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Okay, so I think the simplest way to explain like how you end up with too much inventory of something at the highest level is supply versus demand. You expected to sell a bunch of stuff, and for whatever reason, there's not demand in the market for the things that you're selling. And Amanda put in a note about coronavirus. And so that's a great example of just like no one could have anticipated the economy taking the turn that it has. No one could have anticipated that like all physical retail would be shut down for 3 months and we wouldn't be able to shop that way. The supply was there. All of these blessed retail companies produced goods and put them out on the shelves, and then no one came in to buy it. Specifically because it's summertime, I've been thinking like these poor businesses, they have all this like really summer specific product. Even I can't remember where I was recently, but I was seeing like pool floaties and swimsuits and summer sandals and like all this stuff, and like materially, like people really aren't going on vacation right now. They're not buying all this stuff. And I've just kind of like had like a sad moment in my heart thinking about like what's going to happen to all of this product. Because sure, maybe if it was just a t-shirt or even just shorts, you could keep selling that until September, maybe into October. You could, I don't know, conceivably hold it for next year or something like that. But really this stuff that is super seasonal like just becomes trash. And you kind of have to think about it truly as like a consumer good, or like an item that's being consumed in as much as like food would be consumed. Like it has like a lifespan, and like after that like moment in time it has passed, like the expiration date kind of, like that thing really just becomes garbage because people don't want it anymore. And then even if you in theory we're going to save it for next year and try to sell it next summer, like the trend is going to be different. People want something different by that time. So this thing really like has a finite life, and if there isn't demand for it at the time that it's available for sale, it really just becomes garbage. So go back to your economics like 101 class and just think of like that supply and demand curve. And when you have supply greater than demand, you're really just going to end up with this excess inventory. Another way in general that companies end up with too much inventory is that there is an aggressive sales plan. And so there's an incentive to buy heavily across the board in excess of what, I'm just going to say it, what the buyers and planners anticipate the demand is. There's a pressure from the top to, this Q4 is going to be our biggest holiday season ever. We're going to have so many more customers. I know last year you only sold 1,500 of an average item, but this year you're going to buy 2,500, or this year you're going to buy 3,000 of your average item. And that is actually much more common than you would think. And the reason being is that the CEOs and the presidents and the people that run these companies are paid and compensated off of growth. Mm-hmm, and so even if you have like a good business that's, you know, tried and true, doing good day in and day out, but not really growing much compared to last year, not growing much compared to prior quarters or prior weeks, that's not how CEOs get paid. They get paid when the business grows, and specifically if they have really measurable or market increase in sales, because that's showing an increase in market share. It's showing that the company has growth. It's showing that like investors should invest and all this kind of thing. But if the company is just kind of stagnant and isn't, maybe they're doing good business, but they're not growing, CEO is never going to get like a bonus off of that. And so there's always an incentive from the top to be risky and place these big bets and just see what happens. The CEO often isn't an equity holder or doesn't own part of the company. So if they lose on this bet, they might get fired, but it's not going to be any money out of their pocket. And so you'll see these, I mean, I saw this at Banana. I saw this, and Banana was more interesting in a little bit because that company was publicly traded. So the pressure is actually coming from the shareholders and Wall Street versus the CEO. The CEO is wanting to do what the analysts and do what the shareholders want, but the pressure isn't necessarily coming from the CEO specifically. It's kind of coming from the owners of the company. And then with smaller companies like ModCloth and stuff like that, it's still the same thing where there's still this huge focus on growth. And so even though you as a planner or as a buyer, you may see I'm only selling on average 15 units per week of a scarf or 30 units per week of a dress, and then they want you to buy for 50 or 75, you're like, there's no way this is happening. But you're told to do it anyways.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And so then this stuff is produced. And I mean, and maybe if there's a miracle, maybe you have these wonderful sales that, you know, everything's great and everything's awesome. But if you don't, then you just have massive amounts of excess inventory. And that stuff becomes trash. In a e-commerce company where you have a warehouse and the goods aren't in a store or something like that, it really just bloats the warehouse. Like the warehouse physically will get full of product that is just not bought. And then eventually that has to be liquidated and go somewhere.
Yeah. And based on what I was reading about H&M, this is a big part of how they ended up in the position they're in. There was this idea that they were going to grow, open even more stores, and they were just going to stuff these stores to the gills. Like the growth that they were expecting, which I mean, I'm going to say this, like, I feel like H&M has been on a downturn for a long time. So it's really shocking to hear that even just a few years ago, they were like, nope, H&M, we're going to grow faster than ever.
It's denial, though. I mean, it's denial.
It is. You know, in my lifetime, I've seen brands come and go. We've all seen it. And they have a really, really defined life cycle. And it always seems like the process of a brand just falling off the face of the earth is expedited by this denial that the growth isn't there anymore.
Yeah. The next thing that we can talk about that also can fuel excess inventory, similar to this attitude of wanting to grow, and buy as much as possible to fuel these big sales plans. There's also an attitude in retail that if you sell out of something, then you've left money on the table. So if you sell out, oh, well, we didn't buy enough then. That's money. That's money we could have made that we didn't make. Like you idiot. You've ruined our our business because you didn't buy enough.
Yeah. And I think it's important to call out that like this is the kind of thing that as a buyer or planner can affect the trajectory of your career. It's not just about buying the wrong things. It's also about not buying enough of the things that can bite you in the butt later on.
And I would argue personally as a planner that if you sell out, that's a good thing. You made the right bet. Like
it feels good.
It's a good job, because
mission accomplished. Let's move on.
Yeah. Well, and my sister always talks about type 1 versus type 2 errors. So like when you're buying inventory, like you can be wrong in two ways. You can buy too much or you can buy too little. And from a planning standpoint, I see the higher risk between those two choices of buying too much. Because when you buy too much, you have to liquidate it. And often you're selling it below cost. So whatever money you made on those units that you sold at full price, you're now eroding the profit that you made on those by the ones that you're selling at a loss, right? So I would much rather sell out than not buy enough. And it is interesting. I'm trying to think of, well, let me just say this. And this is, full disclosure, I am in a Girlfriend Collective legging rabbit hole right now. So we'll just call it what it is. But I am looking for these certain leggings from Girlfriend Collective in a certain color. I would actually also like to get the bike shorts too. The bike shorts I've almost all but given up on because I can't find them on the internet anywhere. But in my size, right? And these bad boys sold out. I can't find them anywhere, And I am sad because I want this specific color or whatever, but they sold out. And I've noticed actually with Girlfriend Collective, and there's some other brands where I can tell that their business model is to buy lean and sell out. And it can be frustrating to the customer like me because there's a thing that I want that I can't have. But it also tells me as a customer a message that, oh, if something launches and you want it, you better buy that today. Don't wait until tomorrow. Don't wait until 2 weeks from now because it's going to sell out. And then that gives me an incentive to buy it at full price, right? And so I personally believe that this is a better business model to be in, and also it helps you avoid being in the problem where you have too many straw hats, right? That you have to sell at a loss. So I personally don't ascribe to this attitude that if we sell out, we've left money on the table. I can understand that perspective in theory, but I personally don't ascribe to it. But it is an attitude that people have. And what's also crazy that kind of goes along with this attitude that if you if you sell out, you've left money on the table. There's an acceptance for the fact that you are going to overbuy and that you are going to have too much inventory. And that's just a known issue that you're going to encounter. And so then finance and planning will actually build selling that excess inventory, either at a loss or destroying it or liquidating it or donating it. They will build that loss into the financial plan. And what's crazy is that you can actually still have excess inventory and obsolete inventory that you liquidate for pennies on the dollar and still make money as a whole. And I think that's, if you're thinking about this example with H&M that Amanda started the episode with, H&M is, those people are making money. Like that is a successful business. And yet they incinerated tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pieces of inventory. And I think that just helps call into clarity how cheap that product is, right? If you're able to literally light your product on fire and still be a successful business, that's not okay. And so I think that's kind of the craziness about it. It's crazy that people buy so much inventory. It's crazy that people sell it for so cheap. But what's really crazy is that you can still have a functional, profitable business that participates in these behaviors. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be doing it, right? And they wouldn't still be in business, but they are.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think it's interesting that you talk about this sort of like scarcity model. Like, okay, if we sell out of something, it's going to motivate our customers in the future to all of these things, all of these phenomena, all these things that we think of as being separate and not related. All of their repercussions actually are related. And we're starting to see that now as we dig into this. Your brand is this like, whoa, it's so popular and in demand. Like it's even cooler, right? But we also see luxury brands overbuying and then refusing to mark things down and instead choosing to destroy it because it would be brand damaging to mark it down. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I just think it's interesting that even brands whose entire cachet is this idea of it not being accessible to everyone also say, we're going to overbuy and destroy it.
Yeah.
It's just so gross, guys. Okay.
It's worse than trash.
It's worse than trash. This is trash that people worked hard to make too,
Yeah.
Like it's like when you see a really bad movie or television show and you look at the credits at the end and you think, all these people worked so hard and they were stressed out and maybe some of them missed their mom's birthdays or got sick because they were working really long hours or, maybe they had a moment where they cried and said, in the future, I'm going to have a better work-life balance. And all that came out of it was this shitty movie that everyone will forget. It's like a similar thing, There's like the waste. The waste is exponential. Because it's not even just the clothes, it's the work, it's the time, it's the trucks that delivered them, the gas that was in them. It's so ridiculous. I feel like every episode record, I'm getting more extreme in my beliefs. So, and one more surprising reason for excess inventory that I'm going to call out is that there can be like really poor internal processes in the warehouses and stores that keeping track of inventory. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well, Janine, where like, so like, hey, I just want to let you know, we found like 8 pallets of inventory. I mean, we knew they were there. They were back in the corner. And we just like haven't dealt with them until now. So what do you want us to do? This has happened to me at a lot of my jobs. Like it's so common. And, this happened at Nasty Gal. It started as a place where people threw things that got returned that they didn't have time to process back into inventory. And then maybe someone shipped a couple extra units and they didn't know how to adjust the inventory in the system. So they added that to the pile. And this went on for 4 or 5 years. And suddenly there were like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff in that pile. I remember hearing about this happening at Dolls Kill a couple years ago, and I couldn't find it on the internet, but I remember it being a really shocking amount of inventory. It was like $1 million worth of inventory. And I don't know if that was at cost or at retail, but it was the same kind of thing where people were just piling stuff up like, we'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it later. And then suddenly it was like, oh, it's, 5% of our inventory is just this pile over there in the corner.
It blows my mind how that stuff happens, but it's also one of those things, like, if you've spent any time in a warehouse, you're like, oh, I know exactly how this happens.
It's true. It's true. I mean, warehouses are a complex machine. There's never enough manpower ever, to keep up with things. And if everybody who works there isn't super engaged in some mission to be as efficient and, responsible with the inventory as possible, then these things are going to happen. And I mean, Why would you expect someone who you're paying $10 an hour to be, fretting about what's happening to the returns when they leave work? Like, they're not, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't.
Yeah.
That goes into a whole diatribe about, the treatment of workers in warehouses. And that's a different episode, but for sure. I mean, these things are multifaceted, and it's interesting because I feel like we return to a lot of different themes. We return to this idea of like waste, of the treatment of workers, of us buying so much stuff that we don't care about returning it. Like, all of these things are related, even if they don't seem like it at first. Like, they're all part of a culture that makes us want more and more. And that's linked to a society that, just like covers its eyes when shown waste and injustice. And that's all steered by a capitalist structure that wants more and more for itself, totally at the expense of humans and our environment. It's important for us to try to unpack this, to understand it, and, think more about making better decisions in the future. Knowing is half the battle, to quote G.I. Joe. Hi, it's me, Amanda, again. Janine will be back for the next episode to discuss the ways that brands and retailers deal with all that excess inventory. And oh man, it's a complicated and sometimes dark story. So stay tuned for that. I wanted to take a few more moments to talk about the #PayUp movement. As we've discussed in previous episodes, due to a decrease in sales caused by COVID-19 closures and the terrible state of our economy, many, well, to be honest, probably all apparel brands and retailers canceled orders on their factory partners. And now that Janine has explained to you how these retailers can so easily find themselves with way too much inventory, you can see why their go-to for mitigating the exponential decrease in demand is always going to be canceling. Like, it always is going to be canceling. And guess what? They sure have canceled. Analysts believe that billions upon billions of dollars in orders were canceled in the wake of COVID. $3 billion in Bangladesh alone. And that's just one source of our clothing. To give you an idea of the scale of these cancellations, millions, that's a plural million, of workers in Bangladesh lost their jobs. Millions. And once again, that's just one country. Canceling an order on a vendor isn't as simple as like, oh, okay, thanks for the heads up. We'll just delete that from the system. Remember, most of these clothes are sewn 2 to 3 months before they arrive in a retailer's warehouse. Sometimes even longer, depending on the individual brand's production timeline. I mean, some people are working 6 months out. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit. So if, for example, in March, a retailer cancels an April order, so that's the next month, right? That order is probably already in the US or very, very close. And to be clear, March is when these orders started being canceled. Okay, so we already know that the April orders are done and they're almost here. Well, okay, so it's still March. The retailer cancels a May order. So that could be up to 2 months out. That order is definitely on a boat or possibly already on the way to the airport for shipment via air. Because remember, not only does this stuff have to get to the US, it has to go through customs, and that can take some time. So a vendor who knows what they're doing is going to pad in a few weeks or even up to a month for that process of going through customs, because things get stuck there all the time and it's a nightmare on both sides. Okay, so we've already determined that April and May stuff that was on order that was canceled is already like, what a waste, right? It already existed. Okay, what about if it was a June order? So June would be 3 months away from March. And also, we're pretending that these cancellations were done on March 1st. But what if they were done on March 15th or March 20th? I mean, a few weeks makes a big difference here. So if it's a June order, it was definitely already sewn. And once again, it might already be on a boat. We're seeing a pattern here, right? Okay, so what if it was a July order? I mean, that seems like a lot of time, right? That's like 4 months. But honestly, at the very least, the materials, so we're talking the fabric, the trims, the labels, the boxes the orders are going to be shipped in, the poly bags, all of that has already been purchased by the factory. And the fabric may already be cut. That renders the fabric virtually useless if it can't be sewn into the intended garment. So here, once again, we're talking about some more waste here, and that fabric is paid for. All right, so what if it's an August order? I mean, it's August right now, right? So can you believe that all of this has been going on for 5 months? Me neither. So if it's an August order and it was canceled in March, I'm here to tell you that definitely some of the materials were in process. The fabric was woven or printed or maybe even washed down at this point. It's important to remember the fabric is kind of the first step in all of this. So basically, to summarize, when these retailers canceled the orders in March and April, the suppliers had already purchased materials, the factories had already completed the orders, and the workers had already spent months laboring for a paycheck that wasn't coming. So the sewers, the finishers, the employees of the zipper factory, the fabric mill, and on and on and on. None of these people are getting paid. And it's always really important for me to show you all of the people that our clothing touches, because I think when we hear about factories not being paid, we assume it's just the people who are in there doing the actual sewing. But if you've learned anything so far from Clotheshorse, you know that there are so many other people who touch what we wear, and those people aren't being paid either. Basically, every ingredient of a garment is not being paid for right now. So I want to call out that 80% of garment workers worldwide are women. So most of these employees who aren't getting paid are women, and they're trying to support their families as best as possible. I mean, they're working 10 to 12 hours a day, in most cases making their country's minimum wage, which, much like in the US, the minimum wage is far below a living wage. They live paycheck to paycheck. We know that it's impossible to save money for a rainy day or a global pandemic when you're barely getting by. These women, they don't have the safety net of unemployment insurance. So imagine working 10 to 12 hours a day, raising your family, cleaning the house, cooking the meals, helping with homework, and somehow getting by until COVID hits. And now you aren't getting paid. In fact, you're probably owed back pay, and there's no pay coming down the road. So now you're facing homelessness. You can't buy food. You certainly can't afford healthcare. Meanwhile, back in the States and elsewhere, retailers are canceling orders, but still paying dividends to their stockholders. Psst. Paying dividends means that there's been a profit. Or maybe the retailer is sitting on a lot of cash in the bank that could be used to pay for these orders and therefore prevent the suffering of garment workers across the world. It seems wrong, right? Okay, maybe this seems too far away from you. Like, who knows what the cost of living is like in Bangladesh, so why worry about it too much? Okay, how about this? Let's talk about a place a little closer to home. Los Angeles, California. As we've discussed in previous episodes, LA is the center of the American garment industry. The fallout of COVID was quick and brutal in LA. According to an assessment conducted by the Garment Worker Center, which we'll talk more about them later, approximately 75% of the industry is currently unemployed. 75%, guys. While a small amount of makers are being employed to produce PPE for health workers, the pay for this labor is low, and in some cases, it's only a promise of pay. These workers face the same fear of eviction, starvation, lack of healthcare as their international counterparts. And as we've revealed in the past, made in the USA, made in LA, neither of these terms mean ethical or fair. In fact, the average LA garment worker earns just $6 an hour. Many are undocumented immigrants, or they are paid under the table, so they don't have access to unemployment or healthcare right now. Okay, well, what about the lucky ones who somehow still have a job, probably making masks? Because a lot of our masks are coming from LA right now. Most are reporting that the factories are not taking the right safety precautions, exposing their employees to extraordinary health risk. Remember Dove Charney and LA Apparel? More than 300 employees tested positive for COVID. 4 of them died. The factory was using cardboard as a divider between workstations, and no other precautions were being followed. In a mask factory. In a mask factory. What? Those who are still working are being paid less than ever, or once again, they may be working for the promise of future pay. I mean, what an IOU for working? Are you interested in that offer? So what can you do? There are a few things. 1, I would urge you to follow Remake on Instagram. Their account is @RemakeOurWorlds. They have been aggressively steering the pay up movement. Please sign their petition. So far, they've gotten about 18 brands to pay up, but there's still a lot more to go. This is a good place to find out who hasn't paid and who has decided to pay. If you want to help out LA workers, I recommend checking out the Garment Workers Center. They were tirelessly advocating for workers' rights well before COVID, but now they are working to get food into the hands of these workers, along with helping them with other hardships they are facing right now. You can donate, or if you also are feeling the financial misery of COVID, I hear you, then at least educate yourself and discover more info to share with your friends and family. So, what should you do next? See who isn't paying. It's a very diverse list of retailers and brands. Once again, you can find all of this information at Remake Our World. And start commenting on these brands' social media posts. Don't stop. Don't give up. Share this information with your friends, both on social media and IRL. Honestly, most people still don't even know that this is happening, so we got to get it out there. Next, do not, and I mean do not, buy things from these brands that are refusing to pay. Your purchase does not help them pay for canceled orders. I've seen people commenting that, well, I'm going to buy stuff from this company so that they have money to pay their workers. That's not going to happen. It does not benefit the workers in any way. Listen, hold a grudge, my friends. Hold them accountable. Remember, your money is as powerful as your vote. And we, the Clotheshorse community, we do not vote for assholes. Thanks for listening to another episode of Clotheshorse. Questions, comments, corrections? Please drop me a line at clothehorsepodcast@gmail.com. Right now, I'm actively collecting listener stories for an upcoming episode about drop shipping brands like Shein, Wish, and Romwe. There's a lot more. It's like a long list. I get a lot of Instagram ads for them, so you know what I'm talking about. If you have a story to share about a purchase you've made, send me an email. Or you can find us on Instagram at Clotheshorse Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. And maybe, if you have a few extra moments, you could write a review. This will help us reach more listeners. Thank you to everyone who has been sharing with friends. I love it. Let's bring more awesome people into our circle of not giving money to assholes. Thanks as always to Dustin Travis White for our theme music and audio support. Bye.